Hello again, part two of a lesson called Genuine Faith. We are now in 1 Samuel chapter 16, where Samuel has gone to Bethlehem. Okay, is that unique? Yes, it is. It's called the city of David, and he is interviewing or he's letting the seven older sons. David was the eighth. Seven older sons of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, pass in front of him. And it mentions these three sons by name: Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah. You're going to hear about them again in the 17th chapter. So he made all of his older seven sons pass before him. In verse 10 it says, "And Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. Then Samuel said to Jesse, are all the young men here? Then he said, there remains yet the youngest, and there he is keeping the sheep." Keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. So he sent and brought him in, and now he was ruddy. I think that means he had red, rosy cheeks. He had a good color about him, with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for this is the one. And Samuel took the horn of oil, which represents the Holy Spirit, and he poured it on him. He anointed him in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. How much more should we be more powerful, even than David? Because the Spirit of the Lord has not only come upon us, it has entered into us. Now it can, because the separation has been ended in the person of Christ. So, later on, because Saul becomes distraught about the fact that the Spirit of God is lifted from him, and he no longer has that courage. He no longer has that strength and power that the Spirit gave to him, because he disobeyed God and leaned on his own understanding and did what he thought was right. God took his spirit from him, and he sent a spirit of dismay upon him. And so he would basically go into these periods where he was angry and he was upset, and his servants suggested that someone play beautiful music for him, and David was able to do that. So he got David, and he came and he played the harp. So some days he would spend in Saul's court playing for him, and then he would go back to Bethlehem, which was not far, and he would tend to his daddy's sheep, which tells us that he did not all of a sudden, he was the king, but he was still taking care of the sheep, right? God was still training him. So David was sent from his home. There was a period of time when he was back home with the sheep, and his dad said, look, I want you to bring some cheese, some bread, some other things to your brothers who are in the battle. So he went. And I want to read to you starting in verse 11, 1 Samuel 17:11. Now when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Greatly afraid. But they didn't act like they were afraid. They pretended that they weren't afraid. And you're going to see that in just a second. But let me tell you, their hearts were melting with fear because they did not have genuine faith. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons. And the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. And so he tells his son, bring these provisions to the camp for your brothers, and some dried grain, some loaves, and some cheese. So in verse 20 it says, so David rose up early in the morning. He left the sheep with a keeper, and he took the things and went as Jesse commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for the battle. So they were heading out down, and they were stationed on 2 different hills with a valley in between. Philistines on one side, Israelites on the other. Let me tell you, every day the Israelites would head on down to the edge of the hill, basically to the battle line, and they would shout and they would say, come on, let's get to fighting. Let me tell you what, they didn't mean it. If the Philistines had run across the valley, the Israelites would have run back to their homes. They were scared to death. But they kept up a good face. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up the battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper of the army, and he came and he greeted his brothers, and he talked with them. And there was a champion of the Philistines named Goliath, and y'all have all heard of Goliath by name, coming up from the army of the Philistines, and spoke according to the same words, and so David heard them. Let me tell you, the Spirit of God that was upon David got stirred up when he heard Goliath speak. That's what Paul was saying to Timothy. Stir up the spirit that's within you. Let it take control. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who comes up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, and give him of his daughter, and give him his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. All these kind of things. In other words, Saul was trying to buy someone to do what he did not have the courage to do. We often try to do that too. The point is, we need to have the courage to do it. So, David said, why are y'all letting this guy say these kind of things? I mean, is there not anybody who'll go fight him? Eliab heard what David was saying. Eliab got mad. You know why Eliab got mad? Because Eliab was scared of Goliath too, and he didn't want David shining a light on his fear. And so he degraded David, and he said, you got a bad heart. You've come up here just to watch. You ought to be back there with those few sheep in the wilderness taking care of them. Why don't you go home? You're here, and you're going to make me look bad. Eliab knew what needed to be done. He just didn't have the nerve and the confidence to do it. So, but anyway, David ultimately says, I will go fight this Philistine. I mean, I'm not going to allow him to continue to speak ugly about my God. And so Saul hears that he brings him to him, and he says, you can't go out. You are a youth, and he's been a warrior from his youth. And this guy, seriously, it's hard to describe how big he was. I was thinking about how big he was yesterday. I was standing next to my tractor. The smokestack, the pipe on the very top of my tractor, and it's a large tractor, is about 9 foot tall, and that's how tall he was. I would have probably hit him at about his belly button if I'd have walked up to him. And I'm not a small man. But yet, this was a monster. This guy was a giant, and he had been fighting a long time. David was not going to beat him based on his own strength. It just wasn't going to happen. David wasn't planning on beating him based on his own strength. He understood that God would give the victory. And so he relates to Saul how he has killed a lion and he has killed a bear when he's protecting his father's flock. And he said, this Philistine will be no different. So he goes out to meet him. He took his staff in his hand and he chose 5 smooth stones from the brook. It's often been said that David realized that there was not only Goliath, but Goliath had a son, he had a brother, and his brother had 2 sons. There were 5 giants within that army. Why did he pick 5 stones? I think he was prepared to kill all 5 of them if he needed to. That's how much confidence he had in God. He gave God the proper awe and reverence. He understood that with God, all things are possible. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you would come to me with sticks? You're not a worthy opponent. Let me tell you what, the Spirit of God is always more than a worthy opponent. It is a victor. So, he talks about all of his weapons that he had, his javelin, how big it was. And David said, in verse 45, and David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, that you have defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. He wasn't saying, I'm going to try. He's saying, I'm going to do it, because God is going to make it possible. He's already given me the victory. This is what's going to happen. This day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. that, and this is why, so that I'll be primed to be the next king. No, that's not what he was thinking. So that I will make my brothers look bad. That's not what he was thinking. So that, read verse 47. The end of verse 46. That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. There's a God, and no man stands up and defies God and gets away with it. Then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with the sword or the spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. And you know the story. He certainly did give him into his hands. It says when David got close to him, he ran toward him. And he put that one stone in the sling and he let it fly. And it said it struck the Philistine in one of the few unguarded places right in his forehead underneath his bronze helmet. And it sunk deep into his head, and he fell flat on his face on the earth dead. And David went and took his sword and used it to cut his head off. What's the moral of this story? David had genuine faith. David was not a perfect man. And we see many times after this that David sinned. He sinned grievously against God. But it says David was a man after God's own heart. What made David a man after God's own heart? I think it was David's steadfast faith in realizing that God is able. God is able. He never doubted God's ability or his wisdom or his sovereign will. And he gave himself into the hands of God. Rather than trying to decide to do things on his own, he took the peace that comes from letting God be God. And the last passage I wanted to read to you is from Psalms 4, verses 6 through 8. There are many who say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. You have put gladness in my heart, and today I hope there's gladness in your heart. There is in mine. More than the season when the grain and the wine are increased. I will both lie down in peace and sleep. I can do that. I hope that you can do that today. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Oh, if the world could only understand that God alone allows him to dwell in safety, not circumstance, not good health, not anything else. Thank God for his great peace that he gives to us.